When Emily Carter sits down at the annual Thanksgiving dinner, she expects the usual: her mother's overly sweet pumpkin pie, her father's awkward toasts, and her sister's backhanded compliments. But this year, a quiet tension hums beneath: the clinking of cutlery. Her sister, Carolyn, finally breaks the silence with a cold announcement. "We voted, you're out of the will." The words hit like a stone in Emily's chest. For years, Emily had been the loyal daughter, the dependable one who stayed close to their aging parents while Caroline traveled the world. Yet in a single sentence, her family had stripped her of her inheritance and, worse, her place in the family. What they don't know is that Emily carries a secret, a truth, so deeply entwined with the family's legacy that it could shatter everything Caroline has schemed for. Over 4 chapters, Emily's journey unfolds: the betrayal, the unraveling of old lies, and the final revelation that turns the entire family dynamic on its head. By the time dessert is served, no one at that table will see her the same way again. The dining room smelled of roasted turkey, sage stuffing, and cinnamon, the sense of childhood. The long mahogany table gleamed under the chandelier's golden light, each place setting meticulously arranged with the family's heirloom china. Emily Carter had helped set it herself, as she had every year since she was 12. Caroline sat across from her, looking as polished as ever. Her hair was styled in loose, effortless curls, the kind that probably took an hour to perfect. She wore a deep burgundy dress, subtle yet expensive, and the diamond earrings their grandmother had left her, not Emily, last year. Caroline's husband, Richard, sat beside her, silver watch catching the light every time he lifted his wine glass. Their parents were at either end of the table, a deliberate arrangement. Robert Carter, patriarch of the family, looked older this year, his once dark hair almost entirely white. Beside him, their mother, Margaret, kept fussing with a napkin at her lap, as if bracing herself for something. The meal began with polite conversation, whether work, the neighbor's new Labrador. But somewhere between the cranberry sauce and the mashed potatoes, the air shifted. Caroline's smile grew sharper, and she exchanged a glance with Richard. Then she set down her fork and said, almost cheerfully, "Emily, there's something we should tell you before dessert. We had a little family discussion earlier today. And, well, we voted. You're out of the will." The words rang in Emily's ears, hollow and cold. She blinked, unsure she'd heard correctly. "Excuse me?" Caroline shrugged, as if discussing the weather. "You've chosen a different path, Em. You don't have the same responsibilities to the family anymore. It only makes sense the inheritance reflects that." Emily's grip tightened around her fork. "A different path. I stayed here. I took care of Dad after his surgery. I ran the store when you," Carolyn interrupted, her voice honeyed but firm. "This isn't personal. It's business." Across the table, their mother looked down at her plate. Her father's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The silence was worse than any argument. Emily's heart pounded. She had known her sister could be ruthless, but to orchestrate something like this at Thanksgiving, no less, was beyond cruelty. Still, she forced herself to breathe. They didn't know. Not yet. Emily took a sip of her wine, letting the bitterness steady her. She glanced at Carolyn, then at Richard, and finally at her parents. "Well," she said softly, "I suppose it's only fair I tell you something, too. But maybe after dessert." The rest of the meal passed in a strained, quiet, interrupted only by the scrape of silverware and the occasional fake laugh. Emily barely tasted the food. Her mind was already pulling threads from years of family history, rehearsing the words she would soon unleash. The truth about the inheritance no one at this table suspected when the pumpkin pie finally arrived. Emily smiled, a slow, the deliberate smile that made Caroline's confident posture falter. The game had just begun. Emily didn't touch her slice of pumpkin pie. Its fork lay idle on the porcelain plate, its silver tines catching the chandeliers. Light across the table, Carolyn carved into hers with calculated elegance. as though nothing of consequence had been said minutes earlier. But Emily's mind was far from the present. She could almost feel the pull of the past, a past filled with moments Carolyn had conveniently erased, and truths Emily had carefully guarded. It had started 10 years ago in the dusty attic of their parents' home. Emily had been searching for old photo albums when she found a leather-bound ledger tucked inside an unmarked box. It was heavy, smelling faintly of cedar and age. Inside, neat handwriting chronicled decades of transactions, some legitimate, others far murkier. And in between those careful rows of ink, Emily saw her grandfather's name, Jonathan Carter, a man Carolyn had always claimed as the sole architect of the family's wealth. But the ledger told a different story, one involving a second benefactor no one spoke of, and a string of land deeds signed not by Jonathan, but by Emily's late godfather, Henry Blackwood. The Blackwood connection had been buried intentionally, and with it, the fact that a significant portion of the Carter estate legally belonged to Emily. She had kept that knowledge locked away for a decade, biding her time. Not out of greed, but because she understood the chaos it would unleash. Now, staring at Caroline's smug expression, Emily felt that time ticking louder than ever. Margaret, their mother, finally broke the silence. "Carolyn, perhaps this isn't the time or place." Caroline's eyes sharpened. "It's exactly the time, Mother. Emily needs to understand the decision is final." Emily let out a soft laugh, just enough to make everyone glance at her. "Final? You're sure about that?" Richard leaned forward, his tone measured. "Emily, no one's trying to hurt you. It's about keeping the estate unified. One vision, one legacy. You've always marched to your own drum." Emily raised her glass slowly, her eyes never leaving Caroline's. "Funny, I thought the Carter legacy had two architects." The words landed like a subtle grenade. Robert Carter's gaze flickered, a momentary lapse in his stoic demeanor. Caroline's brow furrowed, and Richard shifted in his seat. Emily pressed on, savoring their unease. "Do you know what I found?" "In the attic, Caroline." "No, of course you don't. You were too busy in Paris, or Rome, or whatever city you were burning through Dad's money in that year." Caroline's voice dropped an octave. "What are you implying?" Emily set down her wineglass with deliberate precision. "I'm not implying, I'm stating. A very large part of this family's fortune didn't come from grandfather Jonathan. It came from Henry Blackwood, and his will doesn't name you." The room fell utterly silent. Even the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the corner seemed to pause. Margaret's eyes widened, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. Robert looked down at his hands, the truth pressing heavily against him. Caroline, however, recovered quickly. "Henry Blackwood died decades ago. If you think some old rumor, not a rumor," Emily interrupted, her voice cool and steady. "I have the documents, the deeds, the signatures. And according to his will, half of the Carter estate, the half you've been pretending is yours, is legally mine." Richard leaned back, crossing his arms, masking his discomfort with a smirk. "If that were true, Emily, you'd have done something about it by now." Emily smiled, slow and dangerous. "Oh, Richard, you have no idea what I've been preparing." Caroline's fork clinked against her plate. For the first time all evening, her confidence wavered. Emily had drawn the first line. The war over. The Carter legacy had begun. The rest of the evening had the brittle stillness of a porcelain vase balanced on the edge of a table. Beautiful to look at, but one wrong move and it would shatter. Caroline was quieter now, though her silence wasn't surrender. It was calculation. Emily knew her sister well enough to see the gears turning behind those cool blue eyes. Caroline didn't take hits. She strategized, plotted, and retaliated. When dinner ended, the family migrated to the living room. The fire crackled in the stone fireplace, casting flickers of orange light across the oil paintings that lined the walls, portraits of Carter ancestors, their gazes solemn and severe. Emily had always felt their eyes followed her, though tonight felt more like approval than judgment. Caroline poured herself a glass of red wine and took the armchair opposite Emily. Richard stood at her shoulder like a silent bodyguard, his expression unreadable. Their parents sat together on the sofa, both looking weary. Emily decided it was time to push further. "You see," she began, her tone conversational. "Henry Blackwood wasn't just some old family friend. He was my godfather. And while you were gallivanting across Europe, Carolyn, he was teaching me about investments, real estate, and the law." Caroline's lips curled in a faint smile. "How touching. And yet, somehow, you still ended up running a small bookstore instead of building an empire." Emily didn't flinch because I wasn't ready to take it yet. I was waiting for the right time, for the right betrayal. Robert Carter finally spoke, his voice low. "Emily, if what you're saying is true, we need to see these documents. This family has kept its affairs private for generations." Emily met his gaze. "Private doesn't mean hidden from me." Carolyn shifted in her chair, crossing her legs in that deliberate way she used when she wanted to project control. "Let's cut through your theatrics. Emily, you have some dusty papers. Fine. But this estate is more than land and money. It's influence, connections, legacy. Do you really think you can walk in and take it from me?" Emily leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't think I know." The words hung in the air like smoke. Richard finally broke his silence, his tone laced with warning. "Careful, Emily. Legacies aren't just inherited. They're defended." Emily tilted her head, studying him. "Then I hope you've been sharpening your weapons, Richard, because mine are already loaded." Margaret gasped softly, and Robert's face hardened. Emily could feel the temperature in the room drop, the polite veneer peeling away to reveal something raw and dangerous. Caroline stood, her wineglass trembling ever so slightly. "You think you've cornered me? But you've underestimated me. My whole life. That was your first mistake. Your second will be believing you can win." Emily rose to meet her, their eyes locked. "And your third will be realizing I already have." The fire crackled louder, as if punctuating the moment. Outside, the November wind howled against the windows. Inside, the battle lines were drawn in silence, but both sisters knew when morning came, the Carter family wouldn't just be divided. It would be unrecognizable. The house was quiet except for the wind outside. But inside Emily's mind, the storm was deafening. She had waited a decade for this moment, and she wasn't going to let it slip away. Her leather satchel rested beside the armchair, and from it she pulled a thick, weathered folder bound with a black ribbon. The paper inside was yellowed at the edges, but each document was perfectly preserved. She untied the ribbon with slow precision, making sure every eye in the room was on her. "You want proof?" she said softly. "You'll get proof." Carolyn scoffed, but Emily caught the flicker of unease in her sister's eyes. The first page Emily laid on the coffee table was a land deed dated 1972, signed by Henry Blackwood and witnessed by Jonathan Carter himself. The next was a notarized letter explicitly naming Emily, then only a newborn, as Henry's sole beneficiary. And then came the final blow, a copy of Henry's will, sealed and verified, outlining the transfer of property, stocks, and cash, assets that formed nearly half of what the Carter estate now claimed as its own. Robert leaned forward, his voice unsteady. "Good Lord, this changes everything." Caroline shot to her feet. "It's meaningless. The statute of limitations hasn't expired." Emily cut in smoothly. "I've already confirmed that with Blackwood's estate attorney. And here's the fun part. The trust is structured in such a way that if the assets were ever taken without my consent, I'm entitled to recover them, plus interest." Richard's jaw tightened. "You're bluffing." Emily reached into the folder again and pulled out a single sheet of crisp, modern paper. A letter on legal stationery. "This is from my attorney. Filed last week. As of this morning, an injunction has been placed on the Carter Family Trust. Nothing moves Nothing transfers, and nothing is sold until this matter is resolved. In my favor. The silence that followed was heavy, like the air before a thunderclap. Margaret covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes brimming with tears. Robert leaned back, staring into the fire as if trying to remember every choice that had led here. Caroline's voice trembled. It's a first crack in her armor. You planned this. Emily's gaze was steady. No, Caroline. You planned to take everything from me. I just made sure I was ready when you did. For the first time all night, Caroline looked small. Not the impeccably composed socialite, but the younger sister caught in a scheme gone wrong. Emily gathered the documents back into the folder, tied the black ribbon again, and stood. You said I was out of the will. But here's the truth. You're out of my will. And after tonight, I don't need to sit at this table to know exactly who I am in this family. She turned toward the door, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. At the threshold, she paused and glanced over her shoulder. Oh, and Caroline. Enjoy explaining to your friends why the Carter estate just lost half its value. Door closed behind her, leaving the family in stunned silence. Outside, the cold November air bit at her skin, but Emily felt warm, alive, victorious for 10 years. She had carried the weight of a secret. Tonight she had turned it into a weapon. And in the space of one Thanksgiving dinner, she had rewritten the legacy of the Carter name. Some battles are fought in boardrooms, others in courtrooms, but the ones that change everything, they're fought at the dinner table.